I'm not as young as I used to be, which means I can't treat my body the way I once did. In fact, last year's medical checkup didn't turn out the best, so I decided I needed to change things up and start eating healthier. One of the ways I do that is by making smoothies. But smoothie shop prices can be pretty high, and making them at home always seem like a pain. You gotta pull the blender out, find the right attachments, set everything up, and then cleaning everything is annoying, making it difficult to quickly whip up a breakfast smoothie in the morning. That's why I'm glad to tell you about the BlendJet 2 portable blender. Like I said, it's portable, so you can blend up a smoothie at work, a protein shake at the gym, or even a margarita on the beach. It's small enough to fit in a cup holder, but powerful enough to blast through tough ingredients like ice and frozen fruit with ease. BlendJet 2 is whisper quiet, so you can make your morning smoothie without waking up the whole house. That's especially important to me because I wake up before the rest of my family, and once my kids are up, my morning work routine is pretty much shot to hell. And best of all, BlendJet 2 cleans itself. Just blend water with a drop of soap and you're good to go. BlendJet 2 has over 30 plus colors and patterns to choose from, so if you don't like one design, there's definitely one that suits your personality. So what are you waiting for? Go to blendjet.com and grab yours today. Be sure to use my promo code SuperCinemaPod12 to get 12% off your order and free 2-day shipping. No other portable blender on the market comes close to the quality, power, and innovation of the BlendJet 2. They guarantee you'll love it or your money back. Blend anytime, anywhere with the BlendJet 2 portable blender. Go to blendjet.com and use my code SuperCinemaPod12. That's SuperCinemaPod and the numbers 12 to get 12% off your order and free 2-day shipping. Shop today and get the best deal ever.
Beautiful, beautiful thing. Jane.
Thor.
I want to feel shitty about you.
What?
Well, yeah, well, I want to feel shitty about something, and I think that's you.
Not really getting it.
It's not, is it? Damn it. I want to... My friend, he told me that it's better to feel shitty from losing love than it is to never experience love and feel nothing at all, feel empty, and I think he was right. Which is how I've been feeling for a long time. I've pushed people away, kept them at a distance because of the fear of that loss, but I don't want to do that anymore. I don't want to live like that.
Close off your heart and feel the pain.
That's what I did, yes. I closed off my heart and I meditated. Did you meditate?
No, that's so boring.
It actually made me more angry. But I'm tired of giving myself over to the idea of fate and trying to figure out what the universe wants from me. I want to live in the moment. I want to live like there's no tomorrow, throw caution to the wind. I want to be with you, Jane. What do you say?
I have cancer.
I'm sorry, what?
I'm sick.
What's happening?
Bye.
No, Jane. Wait,
What
Jane.
did I say? I didn't mean that. Just kidding. I don't have cancer. Let's go smash something.
Jane, I'm so sorry.
Don't be sorry for me.
When did you find out?
Like 6 months ago. I was just feeling tired, and then they told me I have stage 4, get my affairs in order. And then I heard Mjolnir calling me, so I thought maybe if science isn't working, maybe Viking space magic.
Well, that's why you came to New Asgard.
Yeah, I thought the hammer maybe could cure me, and I think it's getting better. Maybe not.
Jane, none of us know how long we have. You don't know what tomorrow holds. And Mjolnir chose you. And it chose you because you're worthy, and that's something. When I first met you, I was unworthy. I was unable to pick up that hammer. But you taught me there is no greater purpose than to help those in need. You made me worthy. So whatever you want to do, we can do together. Now, what do you want to do?
I want to get those children back to their families. I want to finish that mission.
Spoken like a true Thor. How do you feel now?
So scared. How are you feeling?
Shitty.
How shitty?
Really shitty.
Superhero Cinephiles podcast. I'm your host, Perry Constantine, welcoming a new guest today and one of the co-hosts of the Podcast Assemble podcast, and that is Tommy. Tommy, how you doing today?
Hey, buddy. How you doing?
I'm doing pretty good. So before we get started with the movie and everything, why don't you tell people a little bit about yourself and your show?
Yeah, it's great to be here. Thank you for having me. I was actually laughing to myself earlier because I contacted you a little while ago and then life just got in the way and I was like, this guy must think I'm an absolute nightmare. But yeah, I've been trying to get this together for a while. I'm, as you say, a Podcast Assemble podcast and YouTube channel. We're effectively the start of the bad dad joke. It's an American and a Brit walk into a podcast. But yeah, it's just an excuse for me and my buddy to watch pretty much whatever movies we want to, and then talk about them for 2 hours. Get a couple of hours away from the respective partners.
Mm-hmm. Nice, very nice. So, I mean, by the name alone, most people probably assume it's a MCU Marvel focused podcast. But from what you just said, doesn't sound like that's all you guys talk about.
Absolutely, yeah. We kind of started off with a bit of a skew towards superheroes and superhero movies and TV shows. And kind of as we've evolved, we just hit our 100th episode. We've sort of just got into other stuff. Thank you very much. Yeah, stuff we love. For example, we do a bunch of anthologies. Like we do directors we love. We're currently working our way through all the Chris Nolan movies. I'm sure you love the Nolan Batmans. We just did that for our 103rd episode, I think. We did the Batman Begins, which is an absolute favorite and a bit of a slept on classic, I'd say. But yeah, we've got a bunch of other anthologies like movies we want to go back to from when we were kids, or movies that our dads told us about that we never watched, like stuff like that. So things that we're excited to talk about, and like I say, it's a reason to talk for 2 hours and not have any distractions.
Yeah, that's the nice thing. I mean, I don't get the distraction-free part, unfortunately, with two little kids, but it is nice to be able to. That's one of the reasons that my original co-host and I started this show was just I wanted an excuse to talk to him more about movies. So this gave me a reason to talk with him every week. And then after he passed, just kind of wanted to keep it going. And now I've been able to talk to a whole lot of other folks, get a whole lot of other different opinions, such as yourself. And it's been a lot of fun doing it that way too.
Yeah, get to meet new people, work with new users. We actually started ours kind of in COVID, Podcast Assemble, and it was one of those
Same
things
here,
where, yeah, you're supposed to do all the things, like you're supposed to connect with other people to bring on your pod so you can get a broader audience, and we kind of just didn't do that. Life got in the way a little bit, so we're at the point now where we need to start actually doing that.
I had the same thing because it was just me and my buddy at first, so we were just kind of like talking to ourselves and shouting out into the void. Yeah. And it was only after he passed and I realized and people are like, no, we want you to keep the show going. And so then it's like, oh crap, now I got to actually talk to other people.
I'm going to try. Oh my God.
Yeah. It's a whole different experience.
It's hard when you're an introvert. Not going to lie.
Yeah, definitely. And especially, you could probably relate to being on the other side of the world from most of the people you're going to end up talking to.
Absolutely. And it's funny. My buddy's got a few friends. My co-host DL has a few friends who are in the sort of film industry, but in LA. So just connecting is a nightmare because the time differences are so completely different being here in Sydney.
Yeah.
And that would probably be a good way to get some more listeners, but we go about it our way.
Yeah. Anyway, so what was your interest in superheroes? Were you a comic fan growing up, or you more lean towards the mass media side of things? What was kind of your introduction to this whole thing?
Yeah, totally. It's actually funny. I was thinking about this not long ago. I was a massive closet geek for such a long time. So I grew up, my dad used to love Green Lantern. That was one of his absolute favorites. And I would sort of grow up around like Daredevil. He had comics and stuff around those. Like he wasn't massively into talking about it, but like they were around. I knew about them. His all-time favorite movie, and I laugh every time I think about this, was the Ben Affleck Daredevil movie. Oh. And I will never, ever not laugh at that fact. He loved that film for some odd reason. And so I think I grew up...
It's underrated. The director's cut, at least, is underrated.
Yes, the director's cut. I'll give you that. Absolutely. But I grew up with this sort of background and never really lent into it. I loved geeky stuff growing up. Like, I love video gaming. I'm a huge Final Fantasy person. I loved the Pokemon games growing up. God, they were RPGs as well. They were amazing. But in the back of my mind, I had this superhero thing that was kind of itching to get out. And I think when the MCU finally came out, things started to actually be sort of mass media, like you say. People could actually connect with these movies and really see like patterns within them, and that's when I really it all really came out in the podcast. But yeah, so like I say, a bit of a closet geek for a long time.
Yeah, it was a similar idea there, because I remember when I was in high school, I was the only one who was actually who would talk about the fact that I actually read comic books. Nobody else would ever. Other people did, but they would never talk about it. And it was the kind of thing that you didn't let other people know that you were into it. And then
Loud and proud, man. You got to keep going with that.
Yeah, yeah. And then but the first Spider-Man movie came out, and everybody was like, "Oh, we want to go see that." I'm like, "Really? Where have you guys been for the past 4 years?"
Well, like one of my first reasons for really started to like leak out just a little bit was that first X-Men movie. I did a video on our YouTube channel recently about the MCU and some of the problems, and we're going to talk about some of those problems today, I think. But one of my favorite movies is that first X-Men movie, because even though it sort of didn't quite lean into the wackiness of comic books and the bright colors and the excitement, it was all the things I wanted. It was these characters on screen who were, you know, real to me, and I love the X-Men. I've always had a big thing for the X-Men, but like the fact that we got like such an amazing actor in Hugh Jackman, I was like, this is what comic book movies should be.
Yeah. Yeah, X-Men was one of. I always say X-Men walked so that Spider-Man could run, and then Spider-Man ran so that the MCU could fly. Because you don't get to those other ones without having that first groundwork where X-Men gave people a chance to say like, "Oh, we can take superheroes seriously. We're not going to lean into we're not going to put it too far in. We're going to hold back with a lot of stuff, but we're gonna give you a little bit." And then Spider-Man's like, "Yeah, we're gonna use the bright colorful costume, and we're gonna have him swinging around and being a superhero." And the MCU is just like, here's a talking raccoon with a gun, and his best friend's a tree.
Honestly, Groot's my favorite character. Full stop. But isn't it interesting that I believe Kevin Feige was a big part of those movies? Like, I think he was an executive producer on a lot of them, so he learned from their mistakes, especially around that third one. And if you notice, both those trilogies, it's the third one where they kind of topple and fall.
Yeah,
and it's like, it's really interesting that how much he must have learned from that experience.
Well, you know, you mentioned the Nolan movies too. That was another example of that, what I call the trilogy curse, where it's, you know, the first one's really good, the second one's amazing, and the third one, it's time to shit the bed, and it doesn't quite work out.
I know podcasts are supposed to be yes and, but I'm going to go the other way here. I actually don't mind Dark Knight Rises. I think I'm one of the few apologists.
That's all right. That's all right. I'm a bit of an apologist for the movie we're going to be talking about today, so we'll get into that.
Interesting.
I mean, it definitely has flaws. I will say that, but there's a lot of stuff I like about it too. But before we jump into that, what kind of stuff are you into lately? Movies, TVs, video games, anything like that can be superhero related or not.
Oh, mine are all vaguely superhero related. And I want to know if you've seen a movie that's just come out. It's literally only in cinemas. I would assume not, but have you seen Across the Spider-Verse just yet?
No, I have not, because it's an animated film, and you know it's more geared towards kids. So when it comes in Japan, I think it's only available in dubbed form in the theaters.
Right. Okay. Interesting. Yeah. There you go.
So I'm gonna have to wait until it comes out on video.
Right. Because it's the first one is probably one of my favorite movies, and I actually saw a quote from old mate Tom Holland, the current Spider-Man, saying that he thinks Into the Spider-Verse is the best Spider-Man movie. So
really,
the new one just coming out. We went to see that this week. The podcast just released this morning. It's Sunday. It's the beginning of June. I'm assuming this isn't coming out anytime soon, but we released the podcast this morning.
Yeah, I'm so far ahead in recording. This is probably going to come out in like maybe September or something. I don't know.
Oh, wow,
time is a flat circle. I have no idea what's going on anymore.
Well, look. Time is a flat circle. In this context of right now in June, it just came out this week. We did a podcast about it, and it was. I'm not going to tell you anything. I'm going to let you come to your own conclusions. But we had a lot of fun with it, and I've just been creating a YouTube video about that. Some of my favorite cameos within it. So that should be up on the YouTube channel soon too. And the other thing I've been sinking so much time into is the new Zelda game. And I know on your Guardians podcast, you guys talked a little bit about video gaming in general. Because it's hard, man. It's a big game. It's such a
Yeah.
big game, and I feel like it's one of those things whereby I don't actually do anything every time I play it. I I start the thing up. I spend half an hour going from point A to point B, and by the time I got to
Hmm.
point B, I'm like, oh well, that's my entire half an hour that I had to play this
Yeah, yeah,
so I'm
exactly.
just out of time.
I love the open world games, but that is one of the big issues. It's like if I've only got like half an hour or an hour to play, it's not enough time to really do anything other than because there's so
So.
much time between playing sessions, so there's always some update to download first, and then but yeah, and you were talking about Final Fantasy earlier. I'm a huge Final Fantasy VII fan,
Oh
and
yeah, nice.
when remake came out, man, I just dove into that for. I think that was before my daughter was born, so I was lucky. That was still when I had time to play games. But even when she was a baby, like when Ghost of Tsushima came out, like I'd be like holding her in one hand, playing the controller in the other.
Perfect parenting, right?
So yeah, I mean it's tough finding time to play around with these games nowadays. Just there's so much stuff I have with the PlayStation Plus subscription that I
Oh
downloaded
yeah,
for
heck.
free and just have never had a chance to open up yet.
What did you think of the Final Fantasy remake? I'm intrigued.
I really liked it. I thought it was at first I thought they were just gonna do a straight remake, just like the same story with maybe some
Mm.
more beats or something like that. But I was a little curious why they said like the first game would just be Midgar, and then when we got towards the end and stuff started changing, I'm like, they're doing something a lot more different than I expected. This
Yeah.
is pretty cool.
Very, very like very Inception, very like The Matrix.
Hmm.
All these kind of like influences clearly like on the game. I really liked it. Like,
Yeah.
don't get me wrong. If they had have just made a beat for beat remake, I would have been sound. I'd have been
Oh
so
yeah,
happy. But
absolutely.
yeah, I feel like they've done the right thing for a new audience and made it a little bit more meta.
Hmm. Yes, yeah, absolutely. I mean, I love all that multiversal timey wimey stuff, so I'm all out
Ah,
there for that.
totally. It's
But
funny you
anyway,
mentioned Ghost of Tsushima as well. I actually bought that recently, and I literally have it. It's still in the plastic. It's just sitting there, and I'm like, I want to play this game, but I think I
it's
bought
so good.
Elden Ring at a similar time, and
Uh,
that just took my life out. I just played all of that game.
yeah, yeah. Ghost of Tsushima is so much fun. It's like playing a Kurosawa movie.
Oh,
There's even
nice.
a Kurosawa mode where you can switch to like all black and white in it. It's pretty cool.
That's awesome. I'm definitely have to play that
Mm.
soon then, because the new Final
It's
Fantasy's
so
out
much
soon.
fun.
There's like six. I think it's 16 maybe.
Oh yeah, that's right. Yeah, I thought you were talking about the new remake one, but I still haven't. I played 15, and that was okay. But like I've been sporadic on Final Fantasies since 8. Like I never actually played 9,
Hmm.
and I played
Oh wow, really?
parts of 10. Yeah, yeah, I played
Yeah.
part of 10. I played part of 11. No, 11 was the online one. Yeah,
12.
I played that
Yeah.
one a little bit, and I played part of 12. I
Hmm.
didn't touch 13, and 14 I think was another online one. I think I kind
Don't
of
touch 13. It's terrible. There are apologies for
okay.
that game. I absolutely hated it. As like a hardcore Final Fantasy fan, it just broke me. I was like, "What is this?" Ah,
Yeah, and I think 14 was the other online one. I think I played that when it was free for a brief
oh
period,
yeah,
and then
yeah,
I
yeah, yeah.
didn't stick with it. But those MMOs, like they're just I can't do it. I don't have the time to invest in those things.
If like we don't have the time to play the games, we can just play on our own. Imagine trying to get into an
Hmm.
MMO.
Yeah,
It would just be crazy.
absolutely. Yeah. But anyway, today we're talking about Thor: Love and Thunder, the
Oh yeah.
fourth movie, possibly final. We're not. There's not doesn't seem to be a definitive word on that movie in the Thor series. Again, we got Taika Waititi coming back to direct, and of course, the big draw of this one was Jane Foster picking up the hammer and doing a kind of a spin on Jason Aaron's Mighty Thor run from a few years back. Um, but anyway, what did you think of this movie? Well, before we get into the movie, what's your history with Thor as a character in general? Are you mostly familiar with him from the movies? Do you know anything about him from the comics?
Look, I know a little bit about him from the comics. Like I said, my old man had a few kicking around. The whole Donald Blake thing. I always found that a
Mm,
little bit weird. I quite like the idea of superheroes having like a secret identity, but that one just always baffled me. So I never really
mm,
gravitated to Thor in that way. But it's funny you mentioned the Mighty Thor series. I have a prop. I bought I bought that series to read after this. Like the whole thing, it's a chunk. It's like, I don't know, like
Mhm.
2 inches thick or something. Because I was so excited about this movie when it's coming out. We actually on Podcast Assemble do like a most anticipated of the year. So we do like 5 movies we're super pumped for. And I think this was like my most anticipated for 2022.
Mhm.
And coming off the back of a few other ones, a few less than stellar outings from the MCU, like Black Widow, for example, I was like, this is going to be it. This is going to be the turning point. Taika's got it in the bag. And it was so, I was so nonplussed by it. It's the comic is still in the page. It's still in the plastic. And I know it's probably a significantly better comic book than this movie is, but it's made me feel I need to just give it a bit of a break.
Mhm. Yeah, no, I totally get that. I will say the comic is amazing. Like
Yeah,
Jason Aaron
absolutely.
has been cited by people who are big Thor fans as like one of the like right up there. Like Walt Simonson's like the gold standard for Thor
Mm.
writers,
Mm.
and Jason Aaron's been listed as like right alongside him. Like he did an amazing run on that character. Like I wasn't that big of a Thor fan reading when I was really big into comics. I started picking it up when Dan Jurgens was doing it.
Mm.
Read a little bit of it. It was okay. And in the years since, I've gone back and I've read a lot of stuff, and I've read the whole Jurgens run, which is good. I haven't read any of the Simonson stuff yet. I've read the Jason Aaron stuff. I love Jason Aaron's work, and I'd also read J. Michael Straczynski did a run too.
Right.
Excuse me. And that was a really good one too. I thought that one actually brought back Don Blake for the first time in years, but actually found a way to make it work pretty interestingly. So I really dug that one. But yeah, Jason Aaron's run was just spectacular. And
Yeah.
so, but I don't know, like my co-host was really big into Thor. Like Thor was like his favorite character.
Oh, there you go.
At least Marvel characters. And I could never really connect with the character as much. And but when he started popping up in the MCU, I found myself. Yeah, sometimes the MCU they'll change things around with the characters from the comic books. Sometimes for the better, sometimes for the worse. And movies in general will do this, but I think MCU more often than not has given me versions of these characters that I like more than I do in the comics, and in some cases, like
Yeah.
I think Steve Rogers in the movies, Chris Evans' portrayal is. It's not that it's better than the comics, but I think it's like the perfect synthesis of what the comics version is. Downey's Stark he's got the same arrogance and all that but in the comics he was never as snarky, and so I definitely prefer Downey's take on it. And like, the Guardians, all of them, vastly superior to the comics in my mind.
Absolutely.
But
It's funny you mentioned the Thor in the movies. Like, I'm a massive apologist for that first Thor movie. I actually really like it because it's like, I don't know, you guys were talking about it in your Guardians of the Galaxy episode, that the phase 1 of the MCU. It's kind of like a bit of an outlier because he is such a uniquely different character to everyone else. And the fact that the MCU made this weird Norse god work, just for me, like, just highlights how great that movie was. And the fact that it seamlessly blends in. And then when it's the fish out of water character around everyone else. And I think as we get into it, I think that's the thing this movie really missed, Thor being that fish out of water.
Yeah, so it's funny. This is coming at the perfect time because yesterday I recorded an episode on Doctor Strange, and one of the things that we were talking about, how with the first Thor movie, they were really kind of trying to straddle that line of like, how let's introduce magic, but only a little bit, and they did a pretty good job with it, and then that led to Doctor Strange just being a lot more open with what magic is and embracing the fantasy side of it. And that was one of the things I really liked about Ragnarok, is it found a way to blend the fantasy stuff with like the wacky sci-fi stuff, and it did it in a way that worked really well. And this one, so this movie is obviously not very well loved, and I'm not gonna say it's my favorite Thor movie. Like, Ragnarok is clearly superior. I mean, I think even the first Thor movie is I think I would put the first Thor movie above this one as well. I mean, I think that is. I'm an apologist for that movie too. We covered that way back with my original co-host Eric, and we both loved that movie. And there's some stuff I would have liked to see more of. I would have liked to see a little bit less of New Mexico, a little bit more of Asgard, and some stuff like that. But other than that, I love that film. I thought it was great, and I really thought that what Taika did with Ragnarok was really gave it a new injection of creativity and a new boost of enthusiasm. Hemsworth felt like he was much happier playing the character
Mm.
now, as opposed to like when we got to the Dark World and Age of Ultron, he kind of seemed tired, right? I mean, he was still doing it. He was still putting in the work, but he
Yeah.
just didn't seem as enthused about the role as he had been in that first Thor movie or in the first Avengers.
Yeah, and it's really interesting you say that. There's I've actually got a recent video up on the YouTube channel about, I don't know, do you know the trope of like lampshading or hanging a lantern on it? Effectively, if something stupid or something out of the ordinary is happening in a scene, if somebody in the movie quips about that thing being stupid or out of the ordinary, then the audience seems to feel more relaxed and sort of like that, suspend their disbelief just that little bit more. Perfect example is like Hawkeye in Age of Ultron you were just talking about, where he's like, I've got a bow and arrow, we're on a flying island or whatever. Nothing here makes sense.
None of this makes sense. Yeah, I love that.
Yeah,
I love that line.
me too, but that's the perfect example of like lampshading. So he is like literally explaining something dumb to another character, so we all go, oh, if they think it's dumb, it's all right to allow it to just be silly on screen. And I feel like there's a point in somewhere between like all of the Thor movies where they stop lampshading, they just go full comedy, and it's around Ragnarok-ish, and might even be between movies. And there's something about it that just doesn't quite work in the same way a James Gunn movie does. He goes a bit too tight. He goes full Taika Waititi on this, and I don't think it quite works.
No, I definitely, that's a definite criticism I have of this movie. Like, like I said, I enjoyed this movie for the most part, but they definitely go too far into the comedy bits. And I think they would have benefited a lot from, I think part of the reason is they didn't really seem to know what kind of movie they wanted to do, right? It didn't, it felt like, and I think and from what I know, there was apparently a lot of, changing of minds and stuff going on behind the scenes. So they're like, and so they're doing a lot of stuff like reshooting or re-editing stuff or swapping things in and out with CGI. And because I mean there's so many different ways you could have gone with this, right? You could have, I mean, you've got a great premise right from the start, right? Thor is in this place where, and that was one of the things I loved about Endgame, the fact that, he had failed being the great hero, and his mother was like, you don't have to be the great hero, right? You don't have to do that. And his whole idea of like, well, I'm going to try and find myself. I'm going to go out into the galaxy and go out into space, the Guardians of the Galaxy. I'm going to try and find out who I'm supposed to be. That was and we talked about, you probably remember, we talked about this in the Guardians episode. That was such a great setup. And I'm not sure, and I wish we could have seen something with Thor, at least having one movie being part of the Guardians of the Galaxy, and see how he interacts with a different group. I think that would have been so much fun to see. Like, I don't know if you would have done it as Thor and the Guardians of the Galaxy, or as Guardians of the Galaxy, or what you would have done. But I think it would have been nice to get at least one movie to see them go on at least one adventure. But instead, and I don't know if it was because of the behind the scenes stuff with James Gunn being fired and then being brought back in, and then him saying like, we don't want to use Thor in the third movie.
Yeah, it's funny listening to him talk about that. He really did not want Thor in that movie.
Yeah, so and I get that, right? He had an idea for these three movies he wanted to do, and that's totally valid. But and also, like, like I said, in that movie, it felt like Adam Warlock was kind of just like tacked on there. It didn't really feel like that was what he was originally intended to be. And then here we get Thor with the Guardians at the beginning, and but it's almost like an afterthought. It's clearly just like, we got to clear the decks and get this out of the way first, and then we can move on to the other story. And then you've got the whole thing with Jane, which I think is the most interesting part of the movie.
I agree.
And I think I was really thinking of Guardians 3 when I was rewatching this, because that whole idea, what I loved about Guardians 3 was that whole storyline, how they took that idea of Gamora is now Gamora from the past, so she doesn't remember Peter, and the whole idea of it's a metaphor for falling out of love with someone. I thought that was a beautiful story.
Agreed.
I feel like there was some of that in here, like that whole idea of unrequited love and all that would have been really interesting to play with, and we never really got it. Never really played with that concept in any way that I thought it needed to.
Yeah, agreed. And I think watching this movie back, there were two thoughts I had. My first thought was, this movie is way better when you can sit with a Nintendo Switch and play Zelda and not really have to watch it. And my second was that the Jane Foster stuff was so underused. I thought she was amazing in this, and I know from the comic book, my knowledge of those comics, that she is phenomenal in that run, and like it's her struggle against, you know, the cancer that's slowly killing her that really gives heart to those comics. And I think there was some of that in this, but we go back to that lampshading thing, or that problem of the humor. Like Taika Waititi just can't let a scene rest. And I always make this comparison, and it's a random one. And give me a second, you'll understand what I mean in a minute. But I used to love Scrubs. Scrubs was one of my all-time favorite shows growing up. Like, I was a teen.
Oh yeah, same
perfectly
here.
timed. Yeah, perfectly timed. And if you watch those first 4 series, they are immaculate. They're amazing. And something around season 4, season 5 changes, and it becomes a bit wackier, and it's not quite the same. And I think I can't remember I heard this, I'm stealing this, but someone summed it up perfectly for me. It went from being a drama with comedic elements to a comedy with dramatic elements. And I think that's the change we've seen with this character, and the fish out of water part that makes him so compelling, and the drama that goes with that is kind of now in the background, and it's not the same. And much as I love this character, and like you say, it just doesn't quite work.
No, yeah, I think that's totally fair. And I think at some point, Taika forgot that this was supposed to be a serious superhero movie first with comedic elements, and
totally.
Then that he kind of got away from that a lot in this movie, and he leaned a little bit too heavily into the humor. I mean, and also going back to the whole idea of this being overstuffed, right? I mean, you've got Thor trying to find his place in the world. You've got Jane, you know, struggling with this idea of, do I use the hammer and hasten my own demise, or do I, you know, just succumb to like a human, or do I just kind of like, you know, try and whatever, you know what I mean? Can't really figure out how to phrase it right now, but you've got that. Then you've got the whole thing with Valkyrie and New Asgard, and how she's, you know, she's the king, but she hates the bureaucracy of it all, and she wants to go out on adventures again. And then you've got Gore, and you've got this whole thing about, well, the gods haven't done anything for us. Why? It's better to live in a godless universe. I loved all that stuff with Gore. I thought that was great. And it's just like, you've got these 4 very compelling ideas in here. Each one of those could be a movie in its own right. Instead, they just cram them all into one, and it doesn't have the time to really focus on any of them. Oh, plus you've also got the Guardians there too. So that's technically 5 things you could have there.
It's too much, and I'm with you on that. And I think going back to Gore, like, that had so much potential, that character, especially with that comic books run. And the thing with that comics run is it's massive. It's like spanned like multiple years. And I think that's a problem when you get these sometimes decades spanning comic book runs, which have so much detail and so much intricacy, and they just try and like cram it down and go, oh, let's give you the quick version of it. It doesn't seem to always work.
Dark Phoenix is a perfect example of that.
Twice. They did that twice.
Yeah, twice.
I refuse to watch the second one. I'm not going to lie to you. Much as I love McAvoy and what's the other guy? I forgot his name. Much as I love
Fassbender.
Fassbender. I think he's phenomenal. Love those guys.
Amazing.
Quicksilver, and that's great too. When I saw that movie coming out, I was just like, I think I'm good.
Dark Phoenix is, that movie. It's really bad. It's really bad. Somehow they managed to look at The Last Stand and say, how can we make this worse?
Well, you think they'd learn, and it's so funny that Hollywood seems to always take the wrong thing out of movie failures. Have you noticed that? They always go, oh, this failed for this reason. Or if something does well unexpectedly, like, I don't know, Venom, they give you more, like turd rolling in the wind rather than, the things that made it great, Venom being Venom.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. I mean, well, I mean, I've been rewatching Community lately. I think that's a good example where they're like,
Great show.
we don't need Dan Harmon for this. Let's take him out. And it's like, well, let's keep Chevy Chase. And I'm like, well, you're forgetting what is working here and what's not.
Yeah, I love all the community references in Rick and Morty. It's just like,
I haven't seen that
ooh,
actually. I still got to get into that.
really? Oh man, I feel
Yeah.
like you'd
Yeah.
love it. It's great. It's really, really meta, really deep.
Mhm.
It's got a bit strange in the later series, but that's all right. They've got to go through their maturing curve, right?
Yeah. Yeah. And I feel like going back to this movie too, like the gore stuff I thought was like, I remember a lot of people complaining about gore, and like when I was watching this last night, I'm like, I thought his besides Jane, I thought his was the most interesting part of the movie. I thought Bale
Yeah,
was doing a phenomenal job in this. Like he was,
he's chewing some
like that.
serious scenery.
I mean that opening scene, and it's probably because I'm a father now, and it's just like that was heartbreaking.
Yeah, yeah,
Where he's like pleading to the gods like to save his daughter, and like just I just on a personal level, I could relate so much to what he was going through, and that even up until the end, like I could relate so much to that. But and then you contrast that with like these like very dark, sinister places he goes to, and how very genuinely scary he is in some of those scenes. Like I thought his
yeah.
performance was incredible.
I'm with you 100%. And the only minor thing I'd say about that is he really goes from 0 to 100
Yeah,
like in
he
no
does.
time at all. He goes from being like this, seemingly like, really nice father figure who's, to like he's got the spiky teeth and the red eyes and he's terrifying. Like overnight, there's no middle ground.
Mhm.
And I think that's really, really shows how his character has fallen so far.
Yeah, well, I think to the point you were saying before about this being a longer story, like that's something that could have played out in like over like the course of
Absolutely.
like two movies or something. Like I think that would have been um a much more interesting way to do it. Plus you got all that stuff with the gods in here, which I mean like talk about chewing scenery. Like I like the whole thing in like the Celestial City or whatever it's called. It's totally goofy, but I loved Russell
Yeah.
Crowe in that sequence.
Did you? Tell
I
me
thought he
more.
was
Like
so
I
much
found
fun.
him,
I just
yeah.
thought it was so much fun. It was so ridiculous. It was so over the top. And I know a lot of people were down on it because of the way it treated Zeus, but I thought it made perfect sense for the message they were trying to give, right? These are gods who don't give a shit. They've just
Yeah.
gotten, they've gotten flabby and soft and just they don't care about anything but their own decadence. And especially if you go back and you look at mythology, that's 100% accurate. Like
Oh,
it's exactly what they were
absolutely.
doing.
Well, it's funny. We were talking about video games, so I played the recent God of War Ragnarok game, and Thor is
Mm,
just a big dude. Like he's not like Hemsworth ripped or anything. He's just a dude with a big gut who's really tall and swings his hammer around. That is exactly what they were in mythology.
yeah.
They're not necessarily these sort of like I don't know bodybuilder type beautiful beings, but it's you're exactly
Mm,
right, and I think it's interesting the sort of juxtaposition of like them being gods and them being incredibly powerful, but yet they're still hiding. They're still
mm.
stopping the world getting to them or getting Gore, letting Gore get anywhere near them effectively. And when they're in that scene where Thor's calling them all out, how they all shrink away from any sort of just anything that might call them to action. It's really interesting.
Yeah. I mean, I remember there was this one image I saw. It was what caused most problems in Greek mythology, and it's like um some god threw a hissy fit because a human was better than him, fate prophecy that couldn't be
Yeah,
avoided, hubris, and these three only comprise about like maybe 20% of the pie graph. The rest of it is Zeus couldn't keep it in his pants.
that's so true. Yeah, I mean Russell Crowe's the perfect character for that, right?
He's the perfect he did such a great job playing that version of Zeus. I thought it was great. And especially I think it's again this is another example of this is a 6 point that shows like how much stuff is stuffed into this movie. This
Yeah,
whole idea
absolutely.
of, Thor cares because now he has lived among the humans, right? So he's been an Avenger, he's been a superhero, he's traveled the galaxy. He cares about people. He's learned humility and all that. And all of that and that would be really interesting to look at the fact that he's there advocating for humanity to gods that don't give a shit anymore. I thought
Yeah.
that's another very interesting thing that could have been really cool to explore, but it just kind of gets stuffed in as an afterthought.
I'm 100% with you. The thing that really, going back to the broader, like taking a step back from this movie, and the thing that always takes me out, especially when I'm watching like that scene where they're in the Colosseum with all the gods, is like just the quick fire jokes. Like that, it just let it sit, let it be a serious moment, let Thor realize that his hero maybe he shouldn't be your heroes. You know what I mean? Maybe
Yeah.
he's not the all powerful. But no, they have to, flick off his clothes or whatever it is. It's like, give me a second. Just Korg, shut up for just a minute. You know what I mean?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think that was another thing too. I mean, like Korg was great in Ragnarok. He was great in Endgame, right? But what made him great is that he had just these small parts, right? These little
Yeah,
parts, and it's
100%.
like less is more, and with a character like that.
100%. Yeah, absolutely. Minimalist is something that I don't think's ever been in Taika Waititi's vocabulary.
Yeah. But even in Ragnarok too, I felt like as much as I love Ragnarok, I did feel like there were places where he was pushing the line a little bit too far with the humor, and
Right.
I think he benefited in that movie from having, because that was his first movie from Marvel, so he probably had people looking over his shoulder a little bit more, and he probably had Feige saying like, "Hey, pull it back a little bit, pull it back a little bit."
Yeah.
I feel like after the success of Ragnarok, he didn't have that anymore, and he had a lot more freedom. And I think when you give a director a lot of freedom, sometimes it can be a good thing.
Mm,
Sometimes, though, directors need to be reined in, right? There's a reason why it's a collaborative process. And I think
yeah.
I mean, you look at someone like, again, there's so many comparisons between James Gunn and Taika Waititi because they both have
100%.
these kind of similar styles. They both use a lot of humor in it. Their movies have a lot of heart. Whereas Gunn, I think, is a little bit more disciplined as a director, and he's able to find that line. He goes right up to that line, but he doesn't cross it.
Absolutely.
Taika
And I think
went up to that line. He started to dance around a little bit in Ragnarok. In this movie, he just kind of charged right over it.
100%. And it goes back to that thing where James Gunn knows how to keep a movie as a drama with comedic elements, and then this is just an attempted comedy, right? Like there's no bravado here. This is just attempted at being like a full blown comedy, which like fair enough. Like I think my favorite part of the MCU is that even going all the way back to the likes of the Winter Soldier or Civil War, things like that. The MCU really shines for me when they take a genre and they wrap superheroes around it. They go,
yes, absolutely.
This is a spy espionage movie, but superheroes are in it, and that's great. And I love them trying new things. I'm always open to see. I'm excited when they do a Western. My co-host TL, he's a massive Western guy. I'd love to see what that looks like in the MCU. But like,
oh yeah, we did get Logan. That was basically a Western.
It wasn't MCU though. But then if Deadpool
True.
3 is going to be part of the MCU, there's that little crossover there, isn't there?
I mean, I think they said that this is going to be a Logan from a different universe, is what it is. It's not going to be the same one from the Fox movie. So, yeah, we'll see. I mean, I'm really interested to see. But yeah, I mean, I would love to see. I think once they bring Wolverine into the MCU proper, I think you could really do like because I think you do solo Wolverine movies and you structure them like Westerns. Like he's basically a Western character in a superhero universe. So that would work perfectly well.
I love that idea.
There was
sorry, you go.
There was a Greg Rucka did a run on Wolverine back in the early 2000s. I think it was right around the time of that the second X-Men movie came out, and it was very much like that. It was it was Wolverine like being like kind of like this wandering character. He's like going into this town and like and some trouble's happening in this small town. He comes in and he tears shit up basically, and that's
nice.
It was great, and it was a wonderful, probably one of my favorite Wolverine runs ever. So you check that out if you can. Sorry,
I've been really trying to
say something
find.
else?
No, I've been really trying to find the Old Man Logan comic book run, like just as a block, and it's really hard to find. No, not a fan.
Well, the original stuff that Mark Miller did, it's like it's the quintessential. It's like that comic perfectly encapsulates the good and bad of Miller. Like the whole idea of Wolverine old and being like kind of like this Clint Eastwood and Unforgiven type character. That's amazing. But then you contrast it with redneck inbred Hulks, and it's just like it's ridiculous. And
Yeah.
but there was a few years back after the Secret Wars crossover, they brought Old Man Logan into the main Marvel universe.
Yeah, I
That
heard
run is a really good run. That is a really good run.
that. Okay, I'll check that out. That's awesome.
I think that is I'm blanking on the guy's name, but he'd also did a great run on Green Arrow a few years back for DC, and he was amazing on that Wolverine run, that Old Man Logan run.
Yeah. Well, I think going back to what we were talking about, like I like the idea that they attempted more of a comedy focus. I just don't think it really resonated. I don't think the dramatic moments held with, you know, the amount of comedy that was in there. Even though I really like the universe they were trying to create here, like it feels like something different. This sort of superficial, everything has to be gold. The gods' fingerprints are across everything. I really enjoyed that. The thing I didn't enjoy was the fact that you didn't actually get to see the God Butcher butchering any gods.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, yeah.
Like,
you
where was
only
that?
get that first scene. That's all we get, and that's it.
Yeah, yeah. Like you get that amazing shot that's ripped straight from the comics, where you've got the huge, I forget the name of it, the huge dead god, and Thor knows him. And I want to see that fight. That's the one I want to see.
Mhm.
I don't want to see him kill some pompous gold guy.
Well, also it was, and speaking of that scene, like Jamie Alexander, you finally bring her back after she was out of Ragnarok,
Yeah, tell
and
me about it.
she's just completely wasted in this scene
Yeah.
where it's played for laughs, and it's just like I was like, she's such a better actress. Her character is so much better deserves so much better than what she got in this.
Yeah, absolutely. And I don't know why she wasn't in Ragnarok in the first place, like thematically as in terms of story reasons. Didn't make sense, but I do like the idea that she is still in the universe. I'd like to see more of her. I think she's great.
Yeah. She was great in Agents of Shield when she popped. Those times she popped up on that, and it really made me want to see more of her. I said she was great in Agents of Shield.
Okay.
I stuck with it for about I think I haven't watched the last season, but like the Inhuman stuff really started to lose me.
Yeah, okay.
But I thought the first two seasons were pretty strong.
Okay.
And the Ghost Rider season, at least the stuff with Ghost Rider was good. But
Ghost Rider's awesome anyway.
Yeah. But her appearances in that, I thought she was great in those appearances she had on that show. And it really made me want to see more of her playing Sif. And, then she ended up doing that TV show, Blindside or Blind Spot or whatever it is. And I think that caused a lot of scheduling conflicts. And I think that was one of the main reasons why she wasn't in Ragnarok.
I bet she really enjoyed her role in the Loki TV show, where she just could walk in, knee Tom Hiddleston in the nuts and walk off, carry on.
Yeah.
Who gets to say they've done that on film?
Yeah. But I mean, that's another example, this character is just wasted. And, Valkyrie too, like she's, such a great character that we get in Ragnarok, and we get such a great setup at the end of Endgame with her taking over Asgard. And again, that premise right here, like she's clearly bored with being king. She doesn't like this. And that whole idea of, you've seen Superman 2, I assume, right?
Yeah, of course.
That scene when they're in the White House and Ursa says to Zod, "You are Lord of all you survey," and he's just very bored. He's like, "As I was yesterday and the day before that," and he's just like, he was so bored with the idea of ruling. He wanted to conquer, and it's like I get the same kind of feeling from Valkyrie, where she doesn't want to be a ruler. She doesn't want to be a king. She wants to be a warrior, and like too, like the brief moment she gets where she's interacting with Jane, I wanted to see more of that. Like I would. Honestly, what I kind of was hoping for this movie is this would be a way to close out Chris Hemsworth's story as Thor. Give him not even a death scene, right? Because I think that would be playing into the whole heroic death thing that he was supposed to be getting off that path. I think this, have him in a way. I'm mixed on the ending that happens with him. On one hand, I do like the idea that he's kind of settling down a little bit. But on the other hand, he is still going out there being a hero. And I think and the whole, bringing in the love at the end was it felt very forced. Didn't feel like it was really, it felt really tacked on. I mean, I did like that they brought in his actual daughter to play that part. That was cute.
Did you? I found that a bit, I feel like there's a bit of there's a bit of creeping nepotism in these movies. Like, it's just sort of like just coming in around the corners, and you're a bit like, oh, okay, his wife was in the second one, now his daughter's in this one. It's a bit like, come on, guys. I like what you mean. I know what you mean, though, and I do like I do like the new direction they kind of aimed for with that character. I think I like where they got to. I just didn't love the journey to get there. And
yeah, exactly. Yeah.
Prime example being taken out of this movie was the weapons and the whole weird thing with them sort of being oddly sentient. Stormbreaker was like a moody child, or like a vexed
Like a joke's
lover
girlfriend.
constantly.
Yeah.
It was like, what is this? And like
That
at
was
the time, I think I laughed at it, and I was like, oh yeah, that's a comedic moment. But looking back on it, it's like, what is this trying to say?
Yeah, they put, like, it was a fun gag when, like, he's trying to summon Mjolnir and Stormbreaker comes. He's like, oh, it's you,
Yeah.
just what I was looking for. And I'm just like, okay, yeah, that's funny. But they pushed again. Taika took it too far. He took the joke way too far. Just like, to your point earlier with Scrubs, like season 5 and season 6, they've got some great comedy bits, but they took the comedy too far. Like, I remember one scene when Turk hides JD in his backpack, and JD's like all crammed. It's like, that's you kind of forgot what made this show work. I mean, it's a funny bit, but it just doesn't work for what you're trying to do here.
And suspending disbelief is such a big thing, especially in these movies. And the thing that I loved about the early MCU, and I keep going back to that, I'm sorry, but like the reason I loved the Marvel Cinematic Universe in the very beginning was this felt real. Like, the whole Tony Stark building an Iron Man suit, like, it doesn't feel 1,000 years in the future. Like, you see some of the weird mech stuff they're creating, and you're like, oh yeah, that could easily be turned into something. And the fact that the Norse stuff it's just science, we just don't understand it. Like, all that.
Yeah.
It's great, and it's kind of relatable, and the fish out of water. Everyone's been in that situation where they're in a situation they don't feel comfortable in, or they're maybe in a different friendship group that doesn't they don't know anyone. And they stripped all of that out and put JD in a backpack, as you say.
Yeah. Well, also too, like the whole idea of the gods. Like, there was that one of the greatest parts in that first Thor movie was when Darcy says, a primitive culture like the Vikings would have thought these extra dimensional beings were gods. And so they're not actual gods. They're extra dimensional beings that are just really powerful. They're space aliens, basically. And that is kind of undermined in this movie when you've got, the gods hanging out in this celestial city.
Yeah.
And
what is a god in the MCU though? Like, in general?
Yeah.
Is it the celestial?
It's never. Well, I think. And Ragnarok kind of muddled these waters to begin with, and I think it's like, okay, because the whole idea, my interpretation was that Asgard was a separate dimension, but now in Ragnarok it's like a separate planet, and it just it felt really bizarre, and I wasn't sure how those things. It feels like, and I think part of that Ragnarok in some ways was like a soft reboot of the Thor stuff, which is why they killed off everybody.
Kinda. I think the thing that I did, I know I've been really down on this, but the thing I did really like about this movie, and I'm going to go back on myself a little bit here, was some of the action. So I feel like when you go aside from all of the nonsense and all of the jokes, and Taika Waititi can do a really good action scene. Like, so when you're talking about in Ragnarok, when all of Asgard gets wiped out by Hela, that's awesome. That's such an awesome scene. And then when Surtur, destroys it with the giant sword. God, I hope people have seen these movies. Otherwise, we are really spoiling them. But in the scene, so Surtur comes in with a sword and he drops down, destroys Asgard. I really hope people have seen these movies. Otherwise, we're really spoiling them for people. But I think James Gunn, I'm getting confused now. I think Taika does really have a good eye for the action stuff. And in this, he brings that back, So, for example, the scene where they enter the zone where where all the color gets sapped out and it's just black and white. That's really visually interesting. And though the enemies they're fighting, they're not that, they're not exactly riveting. They're just sort of like shadow monsters. But like it's visually very interesting, and I like what he tried to do with that.
Yo, yeah, same here. I thought the fights were one of the action was one of the high points of this movie. Like, especially like the way Jane fights. I love the idea that, because one of the big questions I had was going into this movie, I think everybody had, was, okay, so how is Mjolnir factoring into this? Like, how is
Yeah.
it the one from the other universe? Like, what is? And then you find out it is still fractured. It's just it's been reassembled. And I thought also too, I think it would have been nice to have a scene where it's like Thor being like, well, "Why didn't I think of doing that?" So,
Well, I think that leans into what you were saying before around the Jane Foster arc in this, and I really like the fact that Mjolnir's kind of part of that, because obviously,
yeah.
there's I quite like the background scenes, the ones where it's showing you them in a relationship and how maybe it didn't quite work out. I found that really affecting. I thought that was great. And the fact that he'd asked Mjolnir to be like, take care of her, and it's doing what he asked this sentient hammer to do. But I thought that actually really worked in this scenario.
Oh yeah, absolutely. That was so great. I feel like it part of me doesn't. I like it. I'm of two minds of that, because on the other hand, it feels like you're also undermining Jane's own worthiness, because in the comic she's able to pick up the hammer because she is worthy, and whereas here it seems like she's picking up the hammer because Thor gave the hammer permission to be picked up by her.
Yeah. But I think the whole worthiness thing is completely ruined in this. Sorry for jumping in. If you go to the final scene, where Thor effectively gives all the kids like the worthiness to use anything with the power of Thor, it's like, well, if everyone's worthy, what's the point in it? Do you know what I mean?
Well, I mean, I think that the worthiness thing, the worthiness enchantment is weird the way they've done it in the movies, because I think it only ended up being used. It was kind of used as a plot device in the first movie for Thor to be unworthy, right? Because there's that scene when Odin puts the enchantment on it, and up until that point, it wasn't enchanted, and then only after that point does it get enchanted, which is why like everybody can lift Stormbreaker. But so I don't think the hammer giving powers is necessarily because of that. It's also kind of confusing, because we had that whole arc in Ragnarok where Odin tells him, the hammer was not the source of your powers. The hammer is a conduit. It's a way to channel and focus your powers. And I know people said that they didn't like in Infinity War how he goes and gets a new hammer. I'm like, no, that actually makes sense, because he still needs something to focus the powers in a more concentrated way. And so it made sense for me why he'd need Stormbreaker. But this movie seems to try to have it both ways. It's this idea of like the power is in him, but it's also in the hammer. So I was kind of confused about how that worked.
It was interesting they also introduced yet another weapon. I feel like it's weapon overload in these movies. There's the lightning bolt of Zeus as well, which becomes his new. Well, it's in it for like a minute and then it disappears. He doesn't get it. He obviously doesn't seem to take it with him. I'm not sure he might do, but it's like, what? Why does Thor need all these weapons?
Yeah. I mean, that was another thing too. It felt like the whole. Again, it just feels like that the whole thing with the gods was just an excuse to get this weapon, and it was just a MacGuffin. It doesn't actually serve any purpose. It'd be one thing if the Thunderbolt was actually the key. I think that might have worked a little bit better then.
Yeah, something a bit different. I think that would have made a lot more sense. Like, I feel like what they did was they painted himself into a corner. He had a great weapon. They had Natalie Portman's character also having a weapon, and they're like, how do we make some sort of, where's the tension here? How do we make it How do we take something away? And it's taking the axe away, you then have to go and get another weapon, but it just doesn't work for me. We haven't really talked about the big MacGuffin in this, though. I love that word you use, by the way. That's probably my favorite word in reviewing movies. Like, talk to me about Eternity, because I don't know a huge amount of Eternity from the comics. But I feel like in this, it is the epitome of a MacGuffin.
Yeah, I mean, the Eternity, like I'm not. So Cosmic Marvel is like one of my blind spots. I'm not very tuned into Cosmic Marvel. I know Eternity exists as a character. He is like this kind of like all powerful being. But other than that, I don't really know a whole lot about him. I thought he looked great. I thought they did a great job of translating the character from the comics, and it looked perfect. But one of the big problems I had too is like, okay, it seems like, because unless I'm missing something, this whole thing about being able to approach Eternity didn't seem like a surprise to Thor. It's something he'd known had existed.
100%, yeah.
So when Thanos wiped out half the universe and you
That's
have
what
the
I
key
said.
to eternity, why not? I mean, you don't know it's the key, but still, you know that this is a possibility out there. It seems like a good time to go out and find out what the hell's going on here.
100%. Like, yeah, I get it. He needed to create the hammer in Infinity War, but like, as soon as you know this is happening, why are you not at least checking this out? You know what I mean? Like,
Well, yeah,
you could
I mean,
save half the
Infinity War, I
universe.
understand it because he's the big hero. He doesn't feel like he feels like he can take on Thanos himself. That I get that it's part of his arc. But when you're in Endgame, then you need to have the eternity thing be something that is new to him in this
Yeah,
movie for it to work in the
absolutely.
continuity. Otherwise, it's just like, well, then, dude, you half the universe was wiped out. You were drinking beer and eating pizza for 5 years when you could have been going to eternity and figuring and asking him to do something about this. I mean,
Yeah.
you think it would have been something you would have at least explored, but he and it, the same thing with the gods and the celestial city, right? Thanos wipes out half the universe. This might be a good time to see about talking to the other gods because you know where the place is, you know how to get to there, you know that they
Yeah,
exist. So why aren't you going out and having a conference with them?
absolutely. And if Thor, like, in general, like, that character seems to be not terribly far away from a Thanos level of power
Mm-hmm.
in the movies, at least, before Thanos gets the stones. And if
Right.
some of these gods are potentially more powerful than Thor, like, well, come on, guys, help us out. They could
Yeah.
wipe half of
Yeah.
you out as well, you know?
I mean, and this would have required a level of planning that I don't think Marvel really does. They kind of have like the illusion of planning things out.
Mm,
But I think one of the things that would have been a good idea was to introduce Gore earlier in these movies and have him killing the gods in the background. So then you don't have this problem when you get to Endgame. You don't have
absolutely.
these questions.
Absolutely. And something I actually find really fascinating, and I reheard this the other day, and it's something that was in my brain but had slipped away somehow, was that so initially the idea was after, I think it was after Guardians 2 or after maybe Infinity War, James Gunn was originally going to be like a mini Kevin Feige for the cosmic side of
Mhm.
the universe. So
Yes.
you
Yeah.
have Feige who heads up the whole thing, but mainly keeps his focus on the ground level stuff, and he lets James Gunn run away and do the intricacies of the story in the cosmic side. Now,
Mhm.
to me, like, if James Gunn hadn't have had his whole cancellation for a little while before coming back, if you imagine the story he could have built within the cosmic side, I can totally imagine that being a thing that's
Mhm.
running throughout. That might have been happening in the background if you have a James Gunn in the chair, but they just didn't have that.
Right. Yeah. I mean, I think you heard that in the Gardens episode we did because yeah, Adam had mentioned that originally the plan was Gunn was going to do 3 Guardians movies, and then he was just going to kind of like oversee the cosmic side of Marvel. And yeah, that would have been a great idea. And Thor is the perfect bridge character between those two worlds, him and Captain Marvel. They're
Absolutely.
these perfect bridge characters between what's going on Earth and what's going on
Yeah,
in the
absolutely.
space stuff. And especially Thor because he's already been introduced to audiences. Audiences are already familiar with him, so that's the
Yeah.
perfect gateway to, and especially him going off with the Guardians. Again, perfect gateway to do that. In
Yeah.
fact, that's probably what I would have had this movie be. I would have had an adventure with the Guardians or something, and in the background you have this whole thing where they keep finding these planets of dead gods, and
Yeah.
then you're leading up to the God Butcher in a fourth Thor movie instead, and doing it
Yeah.
that way.
Well, I'm not sure if you guys talked about the regional timeline, but obviously, COVID ruined the Marvel
Mhm.
timeline effectively in terms
Right.
of when movies came out, the length of time it took to make them. I believe Guardians 3 was supposed to come out before a fourth Thor movie. So I could imagine, as part of that, even what you were just talking about, imagine just the Guardians going to all these different planets and they're seeing like
Mhm.
their beings not realizing they're gods. And then within this fourth Thor movie, it just comes back around and crescendos and you go, oh my God, this is what Thor's needing to fight. That would be
Yeah.
fascinating.
Yeah, yeah. It also would be the perfect way to bring in Jane as the new Thor, basically, because you
Yeah.
could have this thing. I mean, again, I'm kind of arguing against myself here because I like the idea of Thor not going to the heroic death, but
Yeah.
or like maybe even him losing his worthiness in a battle
Oh,
with
yeah.
Thor or something like that. And then Jane picks up after that, and then he accepts the fact that he's not worthy. He's happy that he's not worthy. He gives up the hammer. I think that would have been a good closer for his character arc, and also would have set the stage for something really interesting with Jane as Thor going forward.
Yeah, I think what we're effectively coming to the conclusion of here is that this should have been the swan song, right, for Chris Hemsworth, at least
Yeah.
as the mighty Thor. I feel like
Hmm.
this should have been a way for him to bow out on a high. And yeah, I'd love the idea of Jane Foster taking over and been the Thor moving forward for the universe. But I feel like they just got a bit too wrapped up in we've got these amazing stars, we need to use them.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, I think, well, even like, looking at some of the stuff that was cut from this movie, because you also had Jeff Goldblum and Peter Dinklage were supposed to come back, and it says
Right.
that their scenes were actually cut. So they were in this movie, and I don't know where they would have been put in. Maybe in that, I guess maybe in that Olympia scene is the only thing I could think of when they're
Pro-
at the Celestial
Probably
City.
a crap one liner, let's be honest.
Yeah, yeah. And Lena Headey was also supposed to have a part in this. I don't know what she was supposed to do,
I read
but
that. That would have been really interesting because she, like, for me, if you're talking serious actors, she really has
mhm.
that in droves. I don't know. You might have seen the more recent Dread movie with God, what's his name? Who's the dude who was
Oh, Carl
uh,
Urban.
Carl Urban? Why am I forgetting his name? I
No,
love him in The Boys and everything. That
and
Dread movie with
in the
her,
Thor movies, he was Scourge in Ragnarok.
exactly. Yeah, she's terrifying in that film. I'd love to have seen her bringing some real gravitas to this and making it a more
Mhm.
serious, just generally a more serious outing. I feel like she could have been a god who maybe put up a fight against Gore. You know?
Yeah, yeah. Well, I mean, also too, again, going back to the whole Sif thing of it, like, it would have been nice to see her putting up a fight against Gore. And I get what they're
Yeah,
trying to do.
totally.
They're trying to build up the idea of Gore as this big threat, so you only see the aftermath of his devastation, but
Yeah,
you keep undercutting that with the humor, and it doesn't work.
absolutely. And I like the idea. Did you ever watch Game of Thrones?
Here and there, like I haven't
In
watched
and out.
the, yeah.
Fair enough. Oh, no, it's funny because there's a great scene whereby one of the cocky characters talks to Sean Bean's character and says like, "How come you never fight people in tourneys?" And he says effectively like, "Because when I get onto a real battlefield, I don't want people to know exactly what I can do." And now
Mhm.
that if you took that perspective of this and you go, you don't want people to know what Gore can do, perfect. That's a great way to do
Yeah,
this. But as soon as you layer over the fact that Sif's arm getting cut off was used for a joke, and you're a bit like, come on, guys! Like I want the seriousness to this film.
yes, yeah. I mean, especially that scene. It does. That's a scene that deserves to have the full weight and drama to it. Like,
Yeah,
you can have humor in other parts of the movie. Like, I don't want this to be, Batman v Superman, where there's no even chance of humor,
levity.
right?
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, you want to have going back to the Nolan films. Everyone talks about how serious and dark they were. There's lots of moments in levity in
Oh yeah.
those movies.
I love.
Um,
We were talking about this just recently. I absolutely love Michael Caine in those movies because he is
yeah,
almost that. He brings an amount of levity that is just. I didn't expect it from him at all, but it's great.
well, yeah. I mean, like one of my favorite scenes when he says he's going to give up being Batman in the Dark Knight, and he's going to turn himself in, and then Alfred's like, I guess they're going to lock me up as your accomplice. Like, no, I'm going to tell them it was all your idea.
It's one of my favorite lines in those movies. It's great.
Yeah.
One thing we didn't talk about, talking of humor, and something that I am like, I would love to know why you think this was in there to start with. The classic screaming goat meme, which feels like Taika Waititi saw something on the internet and went, "That's funny. I'm going to put that
Mhm.
everywhere." Because wow, there was too much screaming goats in this movie.
I mean, the goats are from the comics, so I think that was
Yes.
he wanted an excuse to bring in something from the comics. I thought it was, yeah. Of the things that bothered me in this movie, that was kind of low on my list. It didn't bother me that much. I thought it was funny at first, and it was, of all the other stuff that was going on, that was probably the thing that bothered me the least of everything else
Okay,
that
all
was
right.
bothering me.
I'd love to know the hierarchy of that list. What was the thing that annoyed you the absolute most?
Um, it's a good question. I think it's maybe it's a tie between the jealous hammer and Korg.
Yeah. Yeah, the best thing about that is even when you think you've got rid of Korg, they keep his face, and you're like, just stop talking.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, it's like and it hurts for me to say that because I loved Korg in Ragnarok. I thought he was one of the best
Same,
things about
same.
it. But
It's the
it's just,
sparingly thing you talked about.
yeah, yeah. But also I want to talk about the designs a little bit because, well,
Yeah,
and that whole idea, and I kind of touched on this a little bit, but one of my favorite scenes in this is the scene with when Val goes to Jane right before they're about to leave, and yeah, you got the funny little joke where she's got the portable speaker, which I thought was great.
yeah,
Um, but also just this sisterhood bond, right? This,
yeah.
where because and that was such a great moment because Val has lost all her sisters. She's lost her sister
Mm,
warriors. So,
mm,
and having now Jane and having this new sister warrior, and she's been a New Asgard now for some time now. Jane has been. We see
yeah,
obviously because Sif mentioned the fact like, oh, she's really good at saving people. She's not good at the quips and all that kind of
quipping.
stuff. So
Yeah,
right. So you feel like they've had some, at least some like small adventures together, at least, or at least some
yeah.
combat training or something together. And so like, and just like their interaction in that scene, I'm just like, I want more of this. I want to see more of Val and Jane having a relationship and seeing how they interact with each other.
Yeah, I think one thing the MCU has done consistently really well is like mini team ups within
Mhm.
movies. Like I know I keep going on about it. I'm sorry, but like for example, going back to the Winter Soldier, it's Cap and Black Widow, or
Right.
it's Cap and Falcon in some movies. These mini team ups, like they don't always work perfectly. Like if you watch the Captain America the Winter Soldier show, is that what it's called? No, it's Falcon the Winter Soldier
Oh,
show,
Falcon and the
right?
Winter Soldier. Yeah.
Yeah, that's the one. I knew it was a thing. I didn't love that dynamic, but I know that movie was completely butchered because of COVID. Like, did you know
Mhm.
this? Apparently, within that whole show, there was a storyline about a pandemic,
Oh
and they
yeah.
just had
Oh
to
yeah.
rip it all out. Yeah, madness.
Yeah.
That's so
And it
interesting.
was supposed to, I think it was actually originally supposed to be like 9 episodes. Instead, they knocked it down to
Right.
6. Um,
Hmm.
I don't
Yeah,
actually the Sam and Bucky stuff was what I loved the most about that show. Actually.
right. Interesting. Well, I kind of agree. I think because it was so stilted and like it felt cut weirdly at times.
Hmm.
Like it didn't always work, and it felt like they took leaps in logic. And I
Yeah.
almost
Yeah.
feel like some of those sensibilities came through in this film. Like I loved the bits where you got these little team ups, like the Thor and Jane. I thought
Mhm.
explore that some more, just give them more screen time. But eventually, it just ended up being Thor and Jane on screen together all the time. But I wanted to see more of what you wanted to see.
Well, yeah. I mean, that whole thing about Thor and Jane, like, I mean, they had this this great relationship, and it burns out because they've got these different commitments,
Yeah,
and now they're in a situation where they have to work together, and that's a having to being forced in a situation where you have to work with your ex and you've still got lingering feelings.
yeah,
That's a really compelling idea, and just like, and you can use that as, or like even the fact that she's dying, and
yeah,
there'd be some understandable conflicting opinions about that, right? You don't want her to
yeah,
die, but at the same time, you know, how supportive can you really feel like you can be in that situation? You don't want to feel like you're taking advantage or anything like that. So
yeah,
there's a lot of interesting dynamics you could explore with that. Just like, again, I keep going back to Guardians 3 because it's fresh in
yeah,
my mind, and it's such an amazing movie. But how they had worked, they'd use that relationships between Quill and Gamora so perfectly in that, and they used
yeah.
it to tell this
Agreed.
really beautiful story. And it's just like I wanted that here because I mean I know a lot of people didn't really like the Jane and Thor matchup. They'd said like they felt like Portman and Hemsworth didn't have enough chemistry together.
Right.
I thought they were great together. I always thought I really enjoyed watching them on screen, all in both Thor and the Dark World.
Yeah, that's never something I ever really picked up on. I think what's interesting about these movies is it's effectively the Star Wars thing. That's Star Wars. Sorry, God, that's going to make people angry. The Star Trek thing. Every other movie is a bad movie. So the first one I liked. The second one was pretty tough. Third one was good. Fourth one wasn't great. And
Hmm.
the interesting thing is, so I don't know if you've ever had the pleasure of doing this, but I actually during COVID for the most part, I sat down and I effectively made my partner watch all of
Hmm.
the MCU movies. So we had this little like thing going on whereby we both had a no veto week, and I could watch something one weekend that she couldn't say no to, and then the next weekend she could watch something I couldn't say no to. Interesting movie choices. I'm not going to lie to you, but we got through the majority of the MCU, and she absolutely loved Thor and Jane Foster on screen. And I think it's an
Yeah.
interesting thing to talk about the conversation we're having right now, it's super deep, it's super nerdy, which I love. But these movies, to make $1 billion, they have to appeal to the likes of my girlfriend. So I'll take her with me. So I
Exactly.
know she'll be interested in seeing this. And she loved the second Thor movie, where I'm like, why are we watching this? But she loved it. And I think that's a reason why people would have wanted to go and see this in cinemas, getting that relationship back on the screen. And
Yeah.
I think it's a shame that they wasted it.
No, yeah, we did that when in fact, funny story, when my wife and I started dating, she said that she doesn't like superhero movies. I'm like, "Oh, I don't know how this is going to work out." And so I showed her Guardians of the Galaxy and she loved it.
Right.
And then I showed her Guardians of the Galaxy 2 and she loved that. And then I showed her the Deadpool movies. She loved those. And then I'm like, "Okay, now she's primed. Now we can start off with the MCU from the start." And we went through and we watched the whole MCU. So she watched them all.
Perfect. You know what's funny? Look, I'm phenomenal, but the only thing that gives me pause is the fact that A, she loved the second Thor movie, and B, she didn't like Guardians of the Galaxy. They're the only things that make me go, "Oh, is this gonna be?"
Oh yeah.
That first Guardians is a masterpiece.
It's such an amazing movie. Yeah, when she ended up loving that, I'm like, okay, good. All right, now I can work with this here.
Yeah. I actually sat down and watched the first Guardians again just after watching the third one. I was so into it. Like I had the playlist playing on Spotify. I was absolutely loving life, and I just sat and I watched it one evening when the girlfriend was out of yoga, and she walked in and she was like, "Oh, this," and I was like, "Ah." But it's funny talking about the music, because going back to Thor: Love and Thunder, what did you think about the music in this? Because I felt at times it was a bit out of place and a bit on the nose.
Yeah, a little bit, but at the same time, it's again, I feel like maybe Taika's trying to take too many cues from Gunn in what he's
Agreed.
doing here. I mean, I thought they were great songs. I thought it was a lot of fun. But also, like, even the thing with Heimdall's son changing his name to Axel because of Guns N' Roses. I'm like, okay, you're pushing things too far now.
Yeah, and then CGI on the Heimdall's son when he has the vision of him, it's just physical.
Well, I mean,
pain.
I didn't like anything with the kids in this, basically. Like,
right, interesting, because we didn't really touch on that at all.
Yeah, I mean, I just thought, like, every time they were on, I mean, I thought the scene with Gore ripping off Octi's head was creepy as fuck, but and I thought that was
so creepy.
And yeah, I mean, I thought it was a great way to establish like how menacing he is, but I don't think you need the kids to have Thor want to stop this guy. Like, I don't think you need that. I don't think that's a necessary part of it.
Agreed. I feel like the original idea for this movie was something along the lines of they fridge a character, right? You obviously across the concept of fridging. They fridge a character, probably someone like a Valkyrie, something like that, to give Thor motivation to go after
even Sif.
Yeah, 100%. Right on the nose. One of these characters, and then they kind of maybe went, oh, in today's day and age, fridging, especially a female character, is probably not the best way to go about this. So they had to find some other motivation to keep him really invested. And I just didn't vibe. Same with you. The kid stuff just didn't jive with me.
I mean, I think you even had that when he finds out all these gods are dying. I mean, like, that's something he's going to want to get to the bottom of. It totally makes sense why he'd want to figure out what the hell's going on here. I mean, because that was his motivation in the comics. All these gods are dying. He wants to find out why. And
some of them
that's all
friends,
you need.
Like,
that's all you need. That's all you need right there. You don't have to kill a character that the audience loves and is waiting to come back to, or in this case, chop off her arm so you don't kill her, and you kind of have it. You kind of try to have it both ways, and then you have these, really irritating kids the whole time, and it's just like none of that is necessary.
Perry, I love that we started this podcast by you saying you were a bit of an apologizer for this movie, and I've managed to bring out the hate in you. I've managed to do it. It's great.
Well, I mean, because there is a lot of stuff that I do like about it. Like, I think the Jane stuff is great, like we talked about.
Agreed.
And, the stuff with Valkyrie, like, it's just, mostly we're focusing on the bad stuff here. And I know people are probably thinking like, oh, he hates this movie, actually. I'm like, no, I don't. Like, I had fun rewatching it last night, but it is this, when you're sitting down and you're trying to examine these things with a more critical eye, these things are going to come up. And
agreed.
Well, what do you think about the designs they used for the characters? Let's talk. That's a good way to probably close things up on.
Yeah, I found them really interesting actually. I know there's a lot of comic lore behind a few of them, especially the blue Thor outfit. I
Hmm.
didn't love it though. I felt like they were trying to make it distinctly different from what he had previously and distinctly different from what Jane Foster was wearing.
Right.
It didn't jive for me. It sort of made him feel almost like a I don't know, like a Jeff Koons artwork. It wasn't,
Hmm.
it was just too shiny and bright. And I think in general, the sort of cinematography of this whole film is that it is this sort of like garish, overly gold, overly bright visual, which is so different from what we had. If you look at the original Thor movie you were talking about,
Hmm.
and I know they've evolved since then, but like that's in New Mexico. That's pretty much the whole film. It's just sand. It's basically that. It's basically one of the Star Wars prequels. We hate sand.
Hmm.
Um, it is just that the whole way through, and taking away that grittiness, I feel adds to the. It just adds to that shiny veneer, which is completely false. That almost
Hmm.
leans into what the rest of the gods are touting.
Yeah, yeah. No, I agree with you on that armor. I thought the costume he wears at the beginning, where he's with the Guardians, that fit because he's hanging out with the Guardians. He's dressing more
Yeah,
like
yeah,
Quill. I thought
yeah.
that was a
Agreed.
very nice choice. And then he changes into that Viking outfit, which comes straight out of the Jason Aaron run, and
That's very
that
cool.
should have been his look going forward throughout this movie. I thought that look
Yeah.
was so great. It looked amazing. Hemsworth wore it well, and I could understand the armor for like a scene when he sees Jane or something like that, but then have him go back to the regular, the classic Viking outfit was much better, I thought. And so yeah,
Mm,
I'm with you. Like I like the nod to the comics, but at the same time, I mean, even when that armor was in the comics, it was a bit too much when we saw it in the comics
yeah,
too.
yeah,
So I don't feel like it's nice to have it as like a nod, kind of like they had the helmet at the beginning of the
yeah,
first Thor movie, and then he takes it
yeah,
off.
yeah,
Or like in the beginning, or like this when they show him as a teenager and he's wearing the helmet. Fine, have it for like a scene or something as like a
yeah.
callback. Same thing when they had the mention of Loki turning him into a frog in Ragnarok, right?
Yep.
Fun moment. I love that they have that moment in there, but it's not something I'd want to see like being like the whole movie.
That was in the Loki series, I think, wasn't it?
Yeah, yeah,
You
they actually
saw
had
a
they had
frog,
Throg
yeah.
there too. Yeah.
I think on the flip side of that is though, I think they got Gore so right. I think in
Yes.
terms of the design, specifically the design, like it would have been very easy to go for the comic look, no nose, get him confused with
Mm.
Voldemort. We'd all be having a good time at his expense, but I think they really nailed the creepiness of him, like the sharp, like the way the teeth became sharp, like his whole arc from being a nice, you know, father, effectively, right, to this evil deity killer, back to
Mm.
being sort of like getting his redemption at the end. The look just works the whole way through.
Yes, yes, absolutely, 100%. I thought Gore looked amazing, and and I thought it was a nice callback that Bale leaned back into his machinist days for that.
Yeah,
Um,
yeah, yeah. That
yeah, I
was real
thought,
creepy, wasn't it, when he was skinny?
yeah, yeah, it was
Yeah,
so creepy. And I remember, funny story when he asked Nolan about being Batman. He's like, "What do I have to do
yeah.
to get to get this role?" And Nolan's like, "Eat a lot." And then he went in and he had overdone it. When he went in for the audition, someone was like whispering, "Is this supposed to be Batman or Fat Man?"
He got big for that movie as well. He
He
went
got big, yeah,
he
yeah.
went hard. Yeah, he went real hard.
Um, but yeah, I thought his look was amazing in it. And I thought Jane too. Like they did it, and like they basically just 100% took the look from the comics, just put it up on screen, and it looked
Absolutely.
great. I
Absolutely.
thought it
What
was
did you think
weird
of
in that
sorry, you go.
the last scene though, when she's when like her helmet's splitting up, like they that the CGI was wonky in that when like her helmet's like
Oh,
broken. I noticed it this side. I'm like, what?
not
I'm like,
great.
just have the helmet broken off, and don't have it at all. Like, there's no reason to have it where like half of it is still on your face, and it's like this really terrible CGI.
I find that so odd. And I find it really odd that in the minute there's this trend of, especially in Marvel movies, that all the masks are CGI. Why?
Hmm.
You know what I mean? Just have a
Yeah,
real.
I mean, this is the this is one of my pet peeves about superhero movies is the fact that there's
Right,
always got to be that obligatory scene where the hero's mask comes off, right?
right.
Like,
Yeah,
yeah, and it's like but even before the CGI stuff, even before like the nano machines and all that, right? You always had that scene in the Spider-Man movies where Tobey Maguire would pull off his mask and just like, why are you doing this? Or like in the Avengers, my favorite moment was in the Avengers when the Chitauri grabs Cap's head and he just conveniently pulls his mask off. Because you paid for Chris Evans' face, you got to see Chris Evans' face.
exactly, and I get it. That's exactly what it is, right? But at the same time, it's like the whole point of the superhero is that's
Exactly.
part of that
Agree.
persona.
I mean, like, kudos to Ryan Reynolds for keeping the mask on all throughout the Deadpool
100%.
movies, or being completely disfigured in them, right? And it's like,
yeah,
kudos to him for
absolutely.
doing that and willing to do that, and like probably pushing for that. I imagine, because I imagine Fox like, no, we paid for Ryan Reynolds, we want Ryan Reynolds' face, and there's like, no, you got to have me covered up in this.
My favorite part of the first Deadpool movie is actually at the very end when he takes the mask off and he just has the Hugh Jackman.
Hugh Jackman, yeah.
A mask on a mask. It's great. The last thing I wanted to quickly mention before you wrap up is the sword, the Necro sword, because they obviously changed it from the comics. It's very different in this. I didn't love the look of it, like in the movie. Like, it was fine.
I didn't really have a problem with it. I thought it reminded me a lot of the Black Knight sword, the whole thing about the curse and all that, and how it's calling out to him.
Okay.
So I'm not sure, because they had that whole thing in the end of Eternals where Dane has the ebony blade, and I wondered if they were trying to set up some sort of link between the two.
Oh, interesting. Or some sort of like sword in a universe. Just some sort of sword in a universe, like something ridiculous.
Yeah. I think the movie is. I think, you know what, if we hadn't had Ragnarok, I think I would have enjoyed this movie a lot more. But the fact that we did have Ragnarok, it set the bar so high that Taika just wasn't able to live up to the expectations. Because again, like, if I'm going to rank the Thor movies, Ragnarok is obviously going to be number one with a bullet. And yeah, I think I'd probably put the first Thor movie second, and I guess this would probably be third.
That's hard to say, isn't it?
Yeah, I mean, I don't know, because I mean, I am a bit of an apologist for the Dark World. I actually kind of enjoy that. There's things I enjoy about that. So it's funny. The Dark World too. I had a lot of criticism of that movie when we talked about it on the show, but that is still, it's a movie that I enjoy more than I don't. Like, it's not a movie, like, the only movie I skip on rewatches is Iron Man 3. That's the one I just like skip over. Yeah.
Mine's Ant-Man.
Although probably now Eternals would probably also be in there too.
Yeah, Eternals isn't great. You know what's interesting? When Eternals first came out, I really enjoyed that movie because I was like, I was at the point of getting a bit sick of all of the over, let's call it oversaturation of comedy in these movies, and I really wanted something a little bit more serious, and that kind of gave me that. But then as soon as I had like 2 or 3 days out from watching it, I went, oh, actually, that was crap, wasn't it?
I mean, I thought Gemma Chan. I thought she was great. Yeah, I thought she was great, and I really liked Dane in it too. I thought he was I thought I wanted to see more of him. Yeah, he's only in it for like 5 minutes, which is annoying. But I would have liked to see more of him too. But yeah, everything else about that movie, it's just like didn't quite. I mean, I'm also biased because like Eternals is one of those things that I just have no interest in. Like, not even Neil Gaiman could get me to care about the Eternals, so I don't think. So, Chloe Zhao had an uphill battle with that anyway with me.
Yeah, I mean, they've done it before, right? Big creating ensemble movies out of nothing, right? And I think it was really interesting because I wasn't sure what was supposed to be the bad guy in that. It was like, what should I focus on? I'm so confused here. And even when they had what were they called? What were the opposites of the Eternals? It was like the
Deviants.
Deviants. Even when they had the Deviants at the end, it was almost like tacked on. It was like, well, just have them in the back. You don't need this big Deviant to come out at the end. Like, the real battle's elsewhere.
Exactly. Yeah. Well, also too, like I think if you had got, like, Gaiman had done this Eternals miniseries back in the early 2000s, I think it was, and in that series he had established like the driving force was that the Eternals had lost their memories. They had like a form of amnesia, and they had to. And I thought that would have been a great way to explain why they've been doing fuck all during the during the Thanos stuff.
Yeah, totally. I really like that bit where he's like, "Where were you when Thanos was here?" I think
Yeah, and
it's
it's.
such an
I mean,
apt
well, that's an
question.
example. That's an example of lampshading that doesn't work.
100%. Absolutely.
But yeah. Anyway, I think that about brings us to the end of Love and Thunder. Do you have any final things you wanted to say about it?
I'm not going to lie to you. I wasn't joking before about watching Zelda while I was watching when I was half watching this. I did play a lot that night. I thought I chose this because I thought we could have a bit of fun tearing it to pieces and having a laugh with it. And then getting into it, I was like, this is everything I remember it being. So I appreciate you for letting me have this moment. It was a bad movie.
I'm not going to go that far. Like I said, I think there's some things I like about it, but
Yeah,
it's just like it's got a lot of potential that's just wasted. Is really
Yeah.
the biggest sin of this movie. It's not. I wouldn't go.
Potential.
Yeah, I wouldn't go so far to call it a bad movie because I think it does have some good performances. It's got some great action. It's just like it just doesn't live up to that potential that it sets for itself.
Yeah, look, the internet's polarizing. You've got to choose one or the other, and I certainly went.
Well, it was
Agreed.
funny when I was because this movie has gotten torn to pieces by like Twitter and Reddit and all that stuff. But when I was looking it up on Wikipedia last night, I was looking up the reception. It actually got a much more even-handed reviews in the press and stuff like that. Some people are like, "Oh yeah, it's pretty good." It's like most people gave it like a C or B, I think, or if you're going to grade it on a letter scale.
It's interesting. I didn't realize that. We on Podcast Assemble we have a very simple grading system. It's that binary version. We say like, is this better or worse than the most average movie that we know? And the most average movie we could think of was Aquaman 2018. And I think at the time we sort of said, this is worse than that. What do you think?
No, if we're going to compare, like, I love Aquaman. I had a lot of fun with Aquaman. So like, if I'm going to compare it to Aquaman, yeah, I'd take Aquaman over this. Absolutely.
There you go. Me too. I would take Aquaman over this as well. I was trying to think of what the critical reception of this was like when it first came out, and IMDb was about 6.4, Rotten Tomatoes was 74, and Metacritic was 57. And I think that says it all for me.
Yeah. I mean, I think too, like there's just a lot of anticipation. Like you said,
agreed.
We're kind of hoping that this would like right the ship for the MCU. This was supposed to be like Marvel's big movie coming out of the pandemic that was supposed to like get everything back on track.
Yeah.
And I think there was too much expectation for it that it would never have lived up to, even if it was a better movie. I don't think it would have lived up to those expectations. And yeah, I mean, I know Hemsworth has said like, he'd be willing to come back if the story's right. And I really hope he does, because I think he deserves a better movie to close out his run.
Agreed. Absolutely agreed.
I mean, and it's possible because we had that happen with Downey. He had Iron Man 3, which was it was kind of like they closed the book on him, but they left it open just a little bit in case he was going to come back. Because at that point, it was his last movie he was contracted for. And I'm glad they didn't end that on him. Like they ended up bringing him back for Civil War and the Infinity War and Endgame. And then Endgame was like the perfect way to close out his story. Same thing with Chris Evans. Like they both got a perfect closure to their story. And Hemsworth deserves that too, because he's the last point on that trinity. He deserves that good movie to close out his legacy as this character.
Agreed. And I'm going to say this with complete love. And I know some people might not love this thought, but I have the same feeling about this version of the character as I do about Batman in movies at the moment. I love the Robert Pattinson Batman movie. I think the Flash movie is effectively going to be a Batman film. But I would just love if they could give Batman 5, maybe 10 years, just not making a Batman film, so that when we get him again, we're all like, oh my God, it's Batman, he's back. Mm-hmm. Where I think if you gave Chris Hemsworth, a little bit of time, just let him take a break. He's trying to take a break from movies a little bit anyway. You just give him that for, I don't know, 5 years, 7 years, maybe 10. Let the next big Avengers movie roll around. When we see him again, how excited would you be for him to finish out his tenure?
No, absolutely. I think that'd be great. I mean, I think the one I go to for that is the Joker. Like, we don't need to see the Joker for like 15 years, I think.
100%.
I mean, and yeah, I think that would be great. And it's not like we're going to, there's going to be a big void. It's not like we're going to be missing him because Marvel's got so many other characters that they can play with now.
So many.
I mean,
they
even
could have
this
had
is
Jane Foster.
exactly. This is another example of a wasted opportunity. You could have had Jane pick up the mantle, and she could have been, run as Thor for a little bit. You could even try to bring in, Thunderstrike, Eric Masterson, and do a spin on that one. That'd be interesting, right? Especially because Hemsworth was wearing a version of the Masterson costume at the beginning of this movie.
Or even what's the guy called? Why have I forgotten his name? The horse face guy.
Oh, Beta Ray Bill. Yes, absolutely. Yes.
Give me Beta Ray Bill.
Yeah, I was so psyched when we saw him his face on in Ragnarok, and I'm like, oh, maybe we're gonna get him in this movie. That was one of the things everyone was hoping for. And have him come up, and you got Stormbreaker already. Have him come 100%. On and take over Stormbreaker for a bit, and then you get to a point where you need Thor in like Secret Wars or something like that, where all of a sudden, just like he came in Infinity War, boom, Thor comes back. He's got Mjolnir again, and he's there to kick some ass.
100%. That's the place of love I'm coming from. Is that you can just imagine that feeling, that feeling exactly from Infinity War, where he bursts in and starts wiping out everyone. I'd love to see that.
Yes, absolutely. Although I would say, bring back the eye patch. I actually thought that was a cool look for him with the short hair and the eye patch.
That was a great look.
I was so bummed when they got rid of that. And I'm just like, oh no, bring it back. It's
another missed opportunity. I feel like Marvel just spit through so many things so quickly in the last few years.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. Well, even like his, the brief interaction he had with Captain Marvel, I thought that was amazing in Endgame. I'm like, I want to see more of them working together.
Yeah. Could you imagine them being on opposite sides in Secret War, at least to start with, thinking they're opponents? Oh yeah,
that would be so cool. Yeah. Oh, now we're just writing fanfics.
100%. Yeah.
All right. This is a lot of fun, Tommy. Thanks so much for coming on. And why don't you tell people where they can find your podcast?
Absolutely. Thanks, Bay. I really appreciate it. Great to watch Zelda and play this movie or something like that. Yeah. Look, you can find us. We're across all major podcast platforms. We are Podcast Assemble, Spotify, Apple, whatever you want. We're across them all. You can find us at Podcast Assemble on Instagram, or if you really want to, you can email us at thepodcastassemble@gmail.com. Check out our YouTube stuff. I do quick, short videos.
Thanks so much for coming on. It was a lot of fun, and we'll have links to that stuff in the show notes, so everybody can go check those out. As for us, we are superherocinefiles.com is the website, Super Cinema Pod on Twitter and Instagram. And remember, if you subscribe to the Patreon page, for as little as $1 a month, you get to watch these. You get to listen to these episodes a week in advance, no ads, and you also get access to the Book Club Companion podcast, where we talk about comic books and graphic novels about once a month or so. Thanks so much for listening, and we'll talk to you next time. If you enjoyed the Superhero Cinephiles, then you'll also love my companion podcast, the Superhero Cinephiles Book Club. All my Patreon subscribers get access to this exclusive podcast where I review superhero comics and graphic novels. Not sure what comics you want to read next or what you should dive into? I've got you covered on that. I'll be doing reviews, recommendations, and also talking to you about useful entry points if you're interested in reading some comics but don't know where you should start. Plus, you'll get access to all episodes of the main show a week before everyone else. On all of this for as little as just $1 a month. All you have to do is go to patreon.com/supercinemapod, and you can sign up at any subscription amount to get started. Thanks so much for your support, and please don't forget to rate and review us on Apple Podcasts or wherever you get your podcasts.
Thank you for listening. And as always, good night, good evening. God bless.